There is something really interesting happening in Burkina Faso. If you saw a recent video about the unrest that is going and has been going on in Libya, then you know that we've recently spoken about the life and regime of Muammar Gaddafi. We're going to be talking about the man who appears to be the reincarnation of numerous different past African leaders and why it is that he's threatening the status quo in Africa. When I say that this video is going to be filled with different kinds of propaganda, yes, there are all different kinds of propaganda that are being used against and for this man because there are all kinds of different entities that seem to fear what it is that he represents more so than any other type of African leader. So who is this dangerous African dictator, you may wonder? Well, that is Burkina Faso's president, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. But my friends, in order to actually start our story here today, we as usual have to pull back the scope of our focus for a moment and go back to the creation of the country that Traoré would grow to rule, Burkina Faso. But my friends, before we go into more details about that, I wanted to show off some other kind of insane invention. No, it's not a book, it's the book. For any of you who have somehow not seen any of the viral videos going across on TikTok and YouTube Shorts and everything like that, this is the book, which is the ultimate guide to rebuilding civilization. An encyclopedia of over 400 pages detailing 180 of the greatest inventions that humanity has ever created, and then explaining, well, how to go and create them in the first place. I mean, this is genuinely insane. You're telling me that if civilization ends, you're not going to want to know how to go and make penicillin or chocolate? Or a trebuchet? Oh, wait, no, hold on. I'm pretty sure that's how we're going to end the next civilization. And boy, do I want to make one now. My friends, I have to say, if you are watching this right now, there's a good chance that you love history, you love geopolitics, you love all the little details that go into this book, which makes this thing a genuine, amazing gift, not only for yourself, but for any friends or family members that would also be interested in similar things. I mean, come on, what says I love you more than teaching someone how to thatch a roof? This absolutely is an awesome book, and you can get one for yourself and support my channel by clicking the link down in my description and using the code that you see here. Thank you, Hungry Minds, for sponsoring this video, and thank you for the book. Genuinely, thank you for this book. It's awesome. Many of you who are watching right now are probably not familiar with the state, but Burkina Faso is a landlocked country in the Sahel region of Western Africa. Its capital is Ouagadougou, and it sits just north of Nigeria and was the home of numerous tribal and ethnic groups for thousands of years. The strongest and most important of those groups was the Mossi people. In the 1880s, during the scramble for Africa, France began to move into the area and subjugated the local peoples, turning the area into a French protectorate in 1896. From there, it went under various different names as France would change its borders and administrative divisions of its colonies over the years until they finally settled on calling it Upper Volta in 1947. This is due to the three separate branches of the Volta River flowing through the country. The river's three tributaries, the Black, White, and Red Volta rivers. In 1958, the colony would gain self-governing independence as the Republic of the Upper Volta, a name derived entirely from European naming conventions. Even the name of the river, Volta, actually comes from the early Portuguese explorers who called it Volta, meaning River of the Bend. This is important to specify because for the first 8 years the country was, well, a democracy with elected officials, it was still essentially playing the role of colony to France. Their former colonial overlords still held considerable influence in the country as well as the many surrounding countries, and then the first of a series of coups occurred in 1966, which you're going to get sick of that word by the end of this episode because I swear to God, everything in here is coups. Going into the 1970s, the Sahel region, of which Burkina Faso is a part of, went through a horrendous drought and famine, and this threw the country into utter misery. Then, the current military dictator approved of a 1977 constitution, and from there was elected as president in 1978, thus ending military rule. But this only lasted 2 years until he was deposed by yet another coup in 1980 that brought in a new dictator again. You following with me here? All right, this government itself only lasted 2 more years as well, and by 1982, guess what? Guess what happened? I'll give you one guess. Yeah, that's right, they had another coup in 1982. And this finally then brought into power the Council of Popular Salvation, which continued the previous dictatorship's policy of banning political parties. The key difference here, though, is that the CSP actually meant it when they said that they intended to form a new government with free elections, and this then is where we meet the first major player of our story, Thomas Sankara. In order to talk about anything with Burkina Faso today, you have to talk about Thomas Sankara, because the current leader of the nation is, in some cases, believed to be the reincarnation of this man. Thomas Sankara was born in 1949 as the third of 10 children. His father was a gendarme for the French, which I know I'm butchering the pronunciation of here in the first place, but I hate pretty much trying to say anything in French, which, in order to explain what that is, imagine it as being kind of like a mix between a cop and a military service member. If anything, it's almost like being a National Guardsman, except you're expected to be around and visible in order to keep the peace. It's militarized police, if you will. Because his father worked for the colonial rulers, their family house was one of the few in the entire region to be made of brick, and they lived in relative comfort. As for what he was supposed to do, well, ironically enough, his parents wanted him to become a Roman Catholic priest, but he decided instead that he was going to go and join the military. The military was a popular choice for young men in the region at the time. Many idealistic intellectuals viewed it as a national institution that might potentially help to discipline the inefficient and corrupt bureaucracy, to counterbalance the inordinate influence of traditional tribal chiefs, and generally to help modernize the country. He entered the military academy in Ouagadougou in 1966, and while at the academy, many of his teachers were civilians. One of these professors was known to be a progressive, and he pulled his favorite students aside for informal discussions outside the classroom where he broadened their perspectives and challenged their current ideologies. During these conversations, the young Sankara would learn about new concepts that he'd never known the names of before. He now understood concepts such as imperialism, neocolonialism, socialism, and communism, as well as the Soviet and Chinese revolutions. He and the rest of the group were brought up to speed on the latest liberation movements that were occurring across the African continent as well, and that planted the seeds of revolutionary thought in the young Thomas Sankara, and he would credit this time as being the birth of his interest in things such as Pan-Africanism and shaking off the influence of former colonial leaders. In 1970, at the age of 20, he was selected to be sent off for special training in Madagascar. And during this period, he was taught things that normal junior officers don't really get to learn or ever hear about. He was taught about agriculture, how to raise crop yields, improve the quality of life of farmers. He would also read voraciously during this time, dedicating himself to learning as much as possible. He was taught history and military tactics and strategy, and he even came into contact with French professors at the academy who were leftists. This helped to further broaden his views, and he moved beyond embracing just simple communism or copying the Cuban model. He would go on to further develop his ideas regarding socialism with a Pan-African twist that involved shaking loose the influence of former colonial rulers. He even went and infused some teachings of the Bible and the Quran into his philosophy at the time. Because of this, he developed a view of what government should be that didn't involve forgetting the proletariat, the common man. No, in fact, his ideas involved embracing the common man and doing what was right for the people. Like, say what you want about communism and other ideologies, you all know full well where it is that I have heavily criticized things here in the past, but in comparison to what some leaders have done, Thomas Sankara took what others had done, picked out the elements that he thought applied to his own people, and turned it into his own new set of ideals while actually living by those ideals, which is a very rare thing that you talk about here in history. Like, you surely cannot say that he was a simple copycat, regardless of what you think of the man or his ideological beliefs. He was smart, he was kind, he was intelligent, and still retained a military bearing and sense of authority. And it didn't hurt that he was naturally charismatic. From here, my friends, he returned home in 1972 and saw combats in a border dispute with Mali in 1974. Now, this conflict earned Sankara national fame, but he himself saw the whole affair as, and I quote, useless and unjust. In 1976, he was made commander of the country's Commando Training Center, and while teaching there, he gathered the most talented and promising young officers he could find. Then, they formed a secret organization called the ROC, and it was in this early group of young officers that he would meet the man who would become a lifelong friend, Blaise Compaoré. More on that guy later because, oh boy, that's going to be an interesting twist in all this. While serving under the then-president Sae Zerbo as the Minister of Information, Sankara ended up getting thrown in jail. Then, less than 6 months later, guess what? Another coup happened, and this brought into power Major Dr. Jean-Baptiste Ouedraogo. Sankara was then made prime minister and pushed the president to make more progressive reforms to help the people, but instead of doing this, he was dismissed from his post and thrown in jail again. This would in turn cause his old friend, Blaise Compaoré, to, and I'm going to give you a chance to guess here, what do you think happened? What do you think Blaise Compaoré did or caused at this point in the story? That's right, another coup. Coordinated with the support of the Libyan government, Thomas Sankara was released from jail and made president on August 4th, 1983. From there, he took heavy inspiration from the likes of Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, and other African socialist leaders. He believed that political revolution was the only surefire way to shake off Africa's colonial past, and he absolutely hated corruption and using one's power to gain influence and prestige. In other words, Thomas Sankara, for all intents and purposes, was a man of the people. And that is not just throwing around compliments where it's not deserved. What I'm about to tell you is something that is wild because it is rare in history for a person to do this. In his first year in office, he focused primarily on reforestation and agriculture to heal the land first and stop desertification. Within a year, he had renamed the country. No longer was it going to be known as Upper Volta, a designation that was given to it by its colonial rulers. Now, the new name that Sankara chose was Burkina Faso. This new land loosely translating to Land of Good People. From there, he even designed the country's new flag and wrote its new national anthem. This is the equivalent to one person doing the work of George Washington, Betsy Ross, and Francis Scott Key, which is pretty impressive, all things considered. Sankara's other primary initiative, aside from healing the land, was to house, feed, and provide medical care for the people of Burkina Faso. To accomplish this, he took multiple approaches, starting with a vaccination campaign focusing on polio, meningitis, and measles. Within the first 2 years, he had over 2 million Burkinabe vaccinated, which Burkinabe is what you call people from Burkina Faso, by the way. Even more serious was the country's infant mortality rate at the time. A staggering 1 in 5 babies, 20%, would die in infancy when Sankara first took office. But within 4 years, he helped reduce that number down to 14%, which is a serious level of progress for such a serious problem in a short amount of time. And Thomas Sankara's administration was also the very first African government to publicly acknowledge and recognize the approaching AIDS epidemic that would rip through Africa during the 80s and 90s, something that in many cases, many governments would just straight up deny was ever taking place. I also just need to stress how incredibly young this guy was. When he attained the office of president, Thomas Sankara was only 33 years old. If he was elected today, he'd be the world's youngest leader in any country, and I say that right now, I'm 30 years old myself. Sankara built homes and infrastructure on a scale the country had never seen before. Over 7,000 villages were given nurseries with which to plant trees, and in just a few years, millions of trees were planted. Knowing that the reason the colonial rulers even showed up in the first place and operated things was the resources that his country possessed, Sankara believed that it was important to make progress without the aid of foreign countries. So, when he built new roads and over 700 miles of rail to export the country's manganese resources, he made sure to do so without any European involvement. Sankara knew that education was going to be his country's savior. Coming into power, he was dealing with a country that was over 90% illiterate. Thanks to the education program started by him, this number would begin to plummet and only continue to drop. By this point in time, around 40% of Burkinabes are literate, which is a huge growth. That number would probably be massively higher, though, if he had been allowed to stay in office. But more on that in just a minute. In August of 1984, all land was nationalized. Previously, local chiefs had decided who could farm. In some areas, private land ownership had begun to arise. The total cereal production would rise by 75% between 1983 and 1986. In 4 years, UN analysts declared Burkinan agriculture as productive enough to be food self-sufficient, which ultimately, that was the goal. Sankara also championed women's rights, stating that they held an important place in the revolution. His administration made massive changes in the lives of women by banning female genital mutilation, forced marriages, and polygamy. He also appointed women to positions of political power for the first time, and made sure to remove all restrictions on contraceptives and establish a Ministry of Family Development and the Union of Burkina Women. He also recruited them for the military for the first time. Really, as active as he was, Sankara was a relatively easygoing and likable man. He oozed charisma and loved the working class, and they really did love him back. Some of the reasons why they loved him are really not hard to understand either. Sankara would do such paradigm-shifting things, such as selling the government's fleet of Mercedes luxury vehicles for state officials, and instead replacing them with Renault 5s. the absolute cheapest car you could buy in Burkina Faso at the time. There was no point in wasting government resources, the people's resources, on luxury vehicles. Something that I can distinctly say when talking about different countries in history and horrible wasteful spending, that is not how it usually goes. He reduced the salaries of government officials, including his own. He banned the use of chauffeurs and first-class airline tickets by government employees. They couldn't just ride off the taxpayers in order to be able to line their own pockets or give themselves luxury trips. When it came to foreign aid, he just didn't trust the IMF or World Bank, saying, and I quote, "He who feeds you controls you." In other words, whoever grants you aid can influence your country's policies. And he is right about that. He called for a united front of African nations to repudiate their external debt, arguing that the poor and exploited did not have an obligation to repay money to the rich and exploiting, which is, it's a little bit of a controversial take, but considering all the past that had been experienced, we know why he felt that way. In the capital, Sankara converted the army's provisioning store into a state-owned supermarket open to everyone, which was the first supermarket in the country. As president, he lowered his salary down to just $450 a month and limited his personal possessions to just a car, 4 bikes, 3 guitars, a refrigerator, and a freezer that was apparently broken. That is it. But arguably, one of the most impressive things that was done, or respectful, I should say in this case, as I genuinely would not survive in this context, is that in his presidential office, Sankara refused to use air conditioning, simply because it was not something that the common Burkinabe would have access to, and in general, government officials were not supposed to use it either. Thomas Sankara loved his country and its people, and for the most part, they loved him back tremendously. The man was just incredibly genuine and humble in a way that you do not really typically see amongst ideologues, and it's hard for me to be able to convey that. But I'm expressing this to you all now because considering how many corrupt ideological figures that we talk about in history, this is rare. He made public officials wear traditional Burkinabe tunics woven from Burkinabe cotton by Burkinabe craftsmen. He did this to remind them where they came from and whom they serve. When asked why he did not want to have his portrait hung in the public places, as was the norm of other African leaders, Sankara would reply, and I quote, "There are 7 million Thomas Sankaras." In other words, he was saying that he was no more important than any other Burkinabe, which is completely untrue, to be honest, considering how most people do not let themselves behave in the way that he does. He was known for jogging in the early morning through the streets of Ouagadougou in a tracksuit, completely unaccompanied, and he would often stop to just talk to the local people. His pistol with a mother-of-pearl handle was a common accessory, spotted on his side when he wore his tailored fatigues. He looked sharp, he was wicked intelligent, he had positive intentions for the people, and in the year 2023, the government of Burkina Faso would formally proclaim Sankara as, and I quote, "hero of the nation." But here is where things get a little bit murky: foreign relations and geopolitics. In terms of his geopolitical standing, Thomas Sankara represented a massive threat to the status quo. He was supported by Libya's Muammar Gaddafi, who is his own interesting figure in his own right, and definitely not as positive as what we could probably say about Sankara. But he was supported because he believed in Pan-Africanism, the concept that Africa could rid itself of colonial influence if only it could unite in solidarity. But this put him at odds with Western powers, including the United States, who ended up putting economic sanctions against Burkina Faso. And the reason they did this was not because of Pan-Africanist ideals, but because Sankara went and denounced the United States invasion of Grenada. That's the reason. That's why that happened. He also called on all African countries to boycott the 1984 Los Angeles Summer Olympics in the name of Pan-Africanism. And while he stood in the good graces of similar African leaders like Ghana's Jerry Rawlings and Libya's Gaddafi, countries that were more closely aligned with Western powers tended to be more hostile to him. This included such leaders as those in the Ivory Coast and Morocco. And ultimately, this criticism would end up leading to Sankara's downfall, though nobody could tell really at the time. I will give you one guess as to what happened next in Burkina Faso. And if you're paying attention, you're going to exactly know what it is that I'm about to say. I'm just going to wait, maybe in the comments section. Right now, you can probably put it. We're waiting. I feel like a Jeopardy sound effect should be playing here in the background. Yeah, that's right. They had another coup. You don't say. On October 15th, 1987, Thomas Sankara and 12 other officials in his administration were killed in a coup. The shocking part of this coup is that it was organized by none other than Sankara's best friend, Blaise Campare. Yeah, his best friend. In reviewing his reasons as to why he had Sankara killed, Campare would claim that Sankara's foreign relations policy jeopardized relations with France and other Francophone nations that were still more loyal to it, which to a degree is true. And he also accused Sankara of having plotted to assassinate the rulers of other former Francophone nations, which appears to have been completely manufactured. We have no actual proof of this. Sankara was attending a cabinet meeting when assassins entered the room and began to spray the occupants with automatic gunfire. He was riddled in the back with bullets as he tried to escape, and an autopsy that was done later would show that he was shot dozens of times in the back. His wife and 2 children would flee the country. Campare would immediately set to work then as the country's newest dictator, and his goal would be to reverse most of Sankara's policies, and he would be very successful at this. He rejoined the International Monetary Fund and World Bank to help spur the economy, but for the rest of his time in power, he would pretty much serve as any other kind of authoritarian dictator. He would consolidate his power and silence his enemies. And in fact, Campare was so good at being a dictator that he would stay in power for 27 years, this being until 2014 when he was removed finally by widespread protests. As for what happened to him afterwards, well, in April of 2021, 34 years after Sankara's assassination, former President Campare and 13 others were indicted for complicity in the murder of Sankara, as well as other crimes in the coup. In October of 2021, the trial against Campare and 13 others began in Ouagadougou, with Campare being tried in absentia. Ex-presidential security chief Hyacinth Kafondo was also tried in absentia. A week before the trial, Campare's lawyers stated that he wouldn't be attending the trial, which they characterized as having defects, and also emphasized his privilege for immunity, being the former head of state. After requests made by the defense attorneys for more time to prepare the defense, the hearing was postponed until the 1st of March. And then on the 6th of April, 2022, Campare and 2 others were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison in absentia. 8 others were sentenced to between 3 and 20 years in prison. 3 were found innocent, and it is highly unlikely that Blase Campare will serve any of that prison time, as he has been living in exile in the Ivory Coast since his deposal in 2014. And so all of that, my friends, all of those crucial details that we discussed here with Sankara, those were absolutely necessary to give us the context to discuss the subject of today's video. In October of 1987, Thomas Sankara was killed. But that next year, in early 1988, a child was born in Kera, Burkina Faso, who one day would actually be considered by many in the nation to be the literal reincarnation of Thomas Sankara. His name being Ibrahim Traoré. A quiet and talented boy, Traore would graduate from the University of Ouagadougou in 2006. He then joined the military in 2009 and received special training in Morocco. He'd make a lieutenant by 2014 and saw action serving in the United Nations peacekeeping force during the Mali War. He then came back home and began to work on the task force responsible for ejecting Islamic jihadists from Burkina Faso. After the Syrian civil war began, ISIS began spreading out and settling in countries throughout the Sahel. This was partially to replenish their numbers by convincing young teenage boys to give it all up and join the global jihad. By the time 2020 came around, Traore had been promoted to captain and given a high level of responsibility compared to others in his country's military. But it was around this time that he began to become more jaded and disillusioned by his country's government officials. He looked around and saw contradictions everywhere. His men suffered from widespread lack of proper equipment and funding, yet he witnessed politicians handing each other, and I quote, suitcases full of money, end quote, for bribery. This caused him to take a position within the military representing the opinions and desires of soldiers from the northern half of the country. So it is then, my friends, that this led to Captain Traore becoming part of a group of army officers that conducted yet another coup in January of 2022. But hey, you might be thinking, all right, this is when he comes to power. No, that was actually going to have to wait for everyone to get more frustrated with the current leader of the military junta that was in charge of the country after that coup that he just committed. And at this point in time, it was Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba. No, Traore would have to wait until the next coup would occur, which did not even take a year to happen. And I know that for all of you watching, you're probably dying to know just how many total coup numbers have occurred in Burkina Faso. But sadly, that's not actually an easy number to come by. This is because there have been coup attempts that did not succeed, and coups that weren't called coups, but rather just transfers of power. But from our best estimates here on the channel, From the period between 1945 and 2024, there were no less than 17 coups or attempted coup conspiracies that occurred in Burkina Faso. And for those whose itch I have just scratched, in the time since World War II, the world's all-time leader since World War II in coups and coup conspiracies is Bolivia, which has had 12 conspiracies, 19 coup attempts, and 17 successful coups for a grand total of 48 coups, coup attempts, or coup conspiracies. I probably need to do a dedicated video for that. In fact, you know what? That's going to be one of the next ones I do. With a history of coups that places it 10th in modern history for total numbers, there was nothing to say that the September 30th, 2022 coup would really change anything or even last for any significant period of time. The group of officers who initiated this coup called themselves the Patriotic Movement for Safeguard and Restoration, and in the aftermath of the coup, they realized the vision and leadership that Ibrahim Traoré possessed, and they elected him as their leader, and he assumed the position of interim president initially. He also claimed that democratic elections were going to be held in July of 2024, and these elections were never going to actually happen, but we will get into why in just a minute. At the age of 35, when he took office, this made Traoré the world's youngest serving state leader. He would hold that distinction until December 2024, when he was surpassed by Kristen Frostadottir, who is actually not a character from the movie Frozen 3, but actually the newest Prime Minister of Iceland, with only a 2-month difference between them. She is just 2 months younger than Traoré himself. Either way, the rule of Ibrahim Traoré has been different from that of other military leaders in Burkina Faso from the very beginning. He is a real student of his predecessors, both in the history of Thomas Sankara and, to a degree, Muammar Gaddafi. From Sankara, he inherited a relentless passion to improve the lives of his people, and from Gaddafi, he inherited the concepts of Marxism and socialism mixed with Pan-Africanism that would inform his foreign policy and planning. Hopefully, that's pretty much the limit of what it is that he gets. He knew that there was still a sizable contingent of people who supported prior administrations and were now considered as anti-government rebel factions. He also knew that ISIS operating and hiding in his country had been a huge pain in the butt, so he set out to tackle both of these problems. In April of 2023, he called for a general mobilization of the population to support the military in overthrowing the rebel contingents, and many Burkinabés would go and answer his call. He also backed out of a previously agreed upon pledge from the country's previous ruler to ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, and this was an agreement to hold free elections within 2 years. Now, initially, Traoré was planning to uphold this agreement, but he claimed that there was too much conflict and civil unrest to hold elections at the time, which, I mean, yeah, it's true that it was a kind of a bad time to have an election, but was it so bad that you couldn't hold an election, period? Not likely. Because of the decision to delay elections, in September of 2023, another coup conspiracy was uncovered. This caused Traoré to declare a mandate to rule for another 5 years until he would hold elections. By December of 2024, it would seem that he'd basically just given up all pretense of free elections as he went and dissolved his own government and basically just went back to rule by military junta. So now, I bet some of you are probably asking, okay, how is he still in power? Or maybe, why did the people allow this to continue? And that is where I do need to remind you of the fact that many Burkinabés consider Ibrahim Traoré as the second coming and reincarnation of Thomas Sankara. It's his actions that have caused people to see him in this light, which I'm going to need to go ahead and explain. Because all things considered, Traoré would deliver on his promise to take care of the ISIS problem. After his mobilization of the population, many rebel groups would answer his call, and this increased both his influence and his military strength. Together, these groups would effectively curb most of the terrorist activities and influence in the country. Because of this, over 2 million displaced Burkinabés who were driven out of their homes in previous years were able to return and actually resume normal lives. The new young leader would also spearhead numerous infrastructure projects, building regional roads and cross-country highways for the first time ever. Roads that took people to people, not just gold out of the country. He also built the country's first independent state bank in 2024. Which, the gold is something that I'm going to need to go ahead and mention here right now, because another reason that people love him within the country is how he approached the nation's gold mining industry. Because gold mining accounts for a whopping 12% of the country's entire GDP. And when it comes to the amount of gold mined, the country is in the top 10 in the world. But it hasn't always been the benefit of that kind of status. For the entire history of gold mining industry in the country, they never had a single gold refinery. This is because France wanted to enrich itself and not its colonies. I mean, after all, they're going to want to keep that kind of dependency relationship. So, in November of 2023, Burkina Faso's Council of Ministers would approve the construction of the country's first gold refinery. The country is Africa's fourth largest producer of gold, yet in the past, all the gold mining and exports were managed by colonial rulers. In fact, aside from the roads into and out of Ouagadougou, some of the only roads that the French ever built in the country while they ruled it were roads leading into and away from the gold mines. And the only roads that led to other countries and crossed the border had been constructed solely for the purpose of sending more gold to France. A few months later, Traore would essentially nationalize the country's entire gold mining industry. This marked a significant development in Burkina Faso's gold sector because previously the gold was mined and the raw ore was trucked out again to be refined by others. Traore seeks to gain more control over the country's gold resources by refining the gold domestically rather than exporting unrefined materials, boosting jobs within the country as well as reducing outside dependencies. This would increase government revenue and economic benefits from the gold sector. The new refinery Traore had built created over 100 new jobs and 5,000 new indirect jobs, with the refinery producing around 400 kilograms of gold daily. He also required foreign companies to give the Burkinabe government at least a 15% stake in local operations, a number which will likely continue to rise. And if that number surpasses 51%, then he will have actually nationalized the gold industry in his country, which is considerably a harder task to accomplish than it seems on paper. Traore found it was just easier to take over the gold mines and nationalize them, which is why he is slowly doing so and will likely continue doing until all but the largest foreign mining companies have fled the country. Anyone who does business in Burkina Faso in the gold industry currently is required by the government to train local employees how to do every facet of the work being conducted, not just import foreign technical specialists. This is Traore's way to ensure that when the country takes over the industry, he can actually manage to run it effectively. Which I will say this is probably one of the smartest things that one can do in the event of nationalization, and you all know on this channel how many times we have covered what tends to happen when countries nationalize industries and how very easily that can become completely screwed up and corrupt. This is arguably one of the smartest ways that it can be done, though that still does not necessarily take away the weaknesses of nationalizing it in the first place. Either way, when it comes to foreign relationships, Traore would pull away from France and actually found a partner and mentor relationship with Russia and Vladimir Putin of all things. Which you may then wonder, why would he cozy up to a guy like Putin? Well, Traore has been quoted as saying, and I quote, "No country has ever developed under democracy," end quote, which is an all-time top 10 spicy statement to be sure and completely untrue, but it is also really indicative of the current moment that authoritarian rulers are having in Africa currently. The coups have been popping off like fireworks across the continent since 2020, and the populations of many countries have embraced strongman rule, even if for no other reason than to see change occur, regardless of whether it's positive or negative, just something to happen. Any kind of change. Because as for what was going on in the rest of the area, we can bring up the ECOWAS. Widely seen as West Africa's top political and regional authority, the 15-nation ECOWAS was formed in 1975 to promote economic integration in member states. It has struggled in recent years to reverse coups in the region where citizens have complained of not benefiting from rich natural resources. According to Oge Onubogu, director of the Africa program at the Washington-based Wilson Center think tank, ECOWAS has grown to become the region's top political authority, often collaborating with states to solve domestic challenges on various fronts, from politics to economics and security. But in parts of West Africa, ECOWAS has lost its effectiveness and support among citizens who see it as largely representing the interest of leaders, not that of the masses. But for Traore, he wanted something different. He found a common bond amongst leaders of two African nations, of Mali and Niger. And with those two countries' cooperation, he pulled Burkina Faso out of ECOWAS because he had a better idea, or at least that's what he thought. What was that idea, you may wonder? Well, his idea was ass. And no, I'm not actually kidding about that. That's right. Traore and his other leaders had ASS on the mind when they banded together to form the Alliance of Sahel States. Ass. That right there is the video. That's everything. That's all we would really need to talk about. This organization is something that, going into detail, is theoretically something that poses a massive threat to the neo-colonial status quo that has existed for many of the NATO countries that were previous colonial overlords. France has been funding and backing the currency of a large number of African colonies with the CFA franc and its two regional variants, which I believe I've actually done a video on here in the past. But what the alliance here is talking about doing is starting their own currency outside of the CFA franc entirely, something that has nothing to do with France, which has been involved in regional politics for decades, something that even ECOWAS and the African Union could not accomplish. The recent creation of the Confederal Bank for Investment and Development, the BCIDAE, this marks a significant turning point. With an initial capital of 500 billion CFA francs, the bank aims to finance critical infrastructure and support local industrialization. Quote, "This project is not just a financial move, it's a political act of sovereignty." This coming from international economist Magege. Quote, "It reflects the Sahel states' desire to finance their own development." End quote. Since their withdrawal in January of 2024, the Alliance of Sahel States has taken concrete steps to accelerate integration. These include the elimination of mobile roaming fees between the three countries, the development of a joint passport, and on the trade front, the implementation of a unified 0.5% customs duty on imports from non-member countries. These measures reflect a shared ambition to build a solid regional economic foundation. And the creation of the bank means that they intend to create a currency and are currently amassing the funds and investors to back up said new currency. So, as it is, when we were talking about this right now, a new mass currency in Africa is likely on the horizon, at least for the Sahel region. And France might not be able to do anything to stop it or influence it like it has in the past. In the past, since the CFA franc was backed by French gold reserves, the French could dictate the terms on which countries that used its currency could withdraw and use their own currency. This new currency, proposed by the Alliance of Sahel States, circumvents all of that and kind of makes Traore a threat to the old status quo and the powers that benefit from things remaining the way they have for decades. Another reason why Ibrahim Traoré is such a threat to the West is that he's created and cultivated a big cult of personality around him within the Sahel region. And it's really not hard to see why he's popular when he's simultaneously carrying on the legacies of two of his greatest influences. He's carrying on the work of improving the quality of life of every Burkinabe directly in the giant-sized steps of Thomas Sankara, but also, on a looser sense, he's fulfilling the dream of Pan-Africanists like Muammar Gaddafi and the establishment of a new African currency. Again, hopefully that is one of the only things that is actually maintained. For followers of either man, Traore must seem like the second coming, at least in terms of the cause. Yet another thing that distinguishes Traore from every African ruler, though, is his heavy use of technology and social media that goes into crafting and maintaining his image. I kid you not, if you just go into YouTube, a simple search on it will show you at least half a dozen AI-generated ChatGPT scripted videos about Traore that just glaze him more than a Krispy Kreme donut. Even more hilarious, there have been recent AI-generated songs and music videos simulating American artists that have surfaced recently supporting him. This list includes artists such as R. Kelly, Beyonce, Jay-Z, and you can hear people driving down the streets of Ouagadougou blasting songs that do not exist. Like seriously, I don't even know how to really react to this. It's like no one said that the future would be like this. They said that we'd have rocket ships and hoverboards, not fake R. Kelly jams about African dictators. Anyway, that is the use of propaganda and AI to support him. But at the same time, you can easily find pro-Western sources that demonize him, some of which are to a cartoonish degree that stop just short of implying that he's been adopted by Putin. The reality is a bit more in between, somewhere in the middle, that we don't really necessarily know the details of yet, and probably won't for many years to come. Traore has accepted support from numerous countries. It just so happens that most of those countries are not close allies of the United States and France. And all of this leads to the sad reality when it comes to Ibrahim Traoré that it's really difficult to ascertain the truth. Like this video, my friends, this was not easy to research. And if anything in here is incorrect, or if you feel that anything is wrong and you want to put that down in the comment section, my editor James, who actually did the majority of the work to write and research things for this script for the video, he has said that he accepts full responsibility. Is Ibrahim Traoré a good guy or a bad man? Well, that unfortunately is going to depend on who you ask and where they're standing and what their beliefs are, as well as simultaneously who is supporting them. Traoré is a complex and fascinating individual, and it remains to be seen what exactly his legacy is going to entail. One thing that we know for sure, though, is that he is pissing off a lot of people, and this can be confirmed by the amount of times and plans there have been to assassinate him that we have at least discovered and the ones that have been foiled. No less than 15 times has there been a plan to kill him, but at least half of those were attempted, all in less than 3 years. The most dangerous plot to kill him actually included someone attempting to bribe his head of security with $5 million to kill him. And what did that security chief do when they approached him with this offer? He actually turned the guy in immediately to the government and stated that he and many other Burkinabés owe everything to Captain Traore. And that's how many of Traore's people do actually feel. They see him as someone that is ushering in a new future for them, a bright future where they get to dictate their own desires and plot their own course. Across the world, leaders don't really know how to handle this new figure, and you can guarantee that they're going to keep a close watch on him and Burkina Faso. And so will we. We do not know what is going to happen. But when there is another big update regarding Ibrahim Traoré, you can bet that we're going to revisit the story and update you. Thank you, my friends, for watching. And don't forget to check us out on Patreon. If you want to join us on any of the trips that we're going to be doing here in the future, make sure to check the links down in my comment section here below. And again, if there's anything that you think about this that is a little bit off, or if there's any ideas that you have for future videos and other things that you would like to see in analysis, then by all means, let me know. Besides that, my friends, I will see you all here next time. Goodbye, and best of luck.